You know, originally I was going to do this in two parts, like two different reviews, but we're just going to review the entire documentary in one. So why don't we go ahead and get into it? Yes, I saw it. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to the channel. If you are new, I am a huge Barney fan, as you can see by the videos on my channel, but also everything here. There's more underneath there. Check the channel. We do a bunch of different history videos on Barney. We do a bunch of different reviews, unboxings, all kind of stuff. I Love You, You Hate Me, Barney documentary just dropped on Peacock today, and we need to talk about it. First things first, no one knew if this was dropping at midnight or not. No one knew if it was like 12 o'clock, 12:01. I was one of the impression that it would be 12:01 or something like that. So like I was up and I was checking the Peacock app and it wasn't there. And I was like, okay. Then I fell asleep. I woke up at like 5:30 or something and checked the app again. It wasn't there, and I was like, "Come on, man!" I was like, "Okay, so what if it's a situation where I have to get premium to see it? Because you know, premium sometimes can get you access to the newest things that drop." So I paid the $5 for premium, and there, like, lo and behold, it still wasn't up, and I was like, I'm just about to. But then apparently, I don't know if it just took a while to drop or whatever after I did premium, but I think it dropped at 6 a.m. So like I immediately like got my computer out because I was about to play like Splatoon until it dropped. But it lo and behold, it came out and like both parts. So I got like a thing of Pringles and I sat down and I started watching the documentary. A lot of different things that I want to talk about that are both very interesting for the community of Barney to see, and also some things that I did not like about the documentary. It was fine. I'll just say that first and foremost, the documentary was fine. It wasn't like exciting. It was okay. It was fine. It was all right. It was a documentary. It was very well put together, and I thought it was fine. Shout out to my friends Andrew, Kaylin, Jackson. You all did wonderful in the documentary, and I'm very proud of your contribution to the doc. There will probably be chapters on the video player, so if you want to skip around to different parts, or if you just want to watch it all the way through, it's there for your liking if you so choose. So first things first, the very first thing you see in the documentary is a thing that says, in 1988, Sheryl Leach created a monster. And I like that they set it up like this because it really gets you sort of intrigued as to what they're going to be talking about. Because of course, with like the marketing and then the trailer and everything, you know that they're going to be talking about a lot of very serious stuff. And in the 90s, a lot of people had this hate for Barney that was growing and growing and growing. And it got to the point where, you know, people on the crew were receiving a lot of different threats and a lot of different just really harmful and hurtful mail. This line that we see very first and foremost is, I thought, very well done. Now, the very beginning, I want to say like 3 or 4 minutes, it gets you introduced to a lot of the main players in the Barney community, or sorry, the Barney crew. And it has a very strong, like, horror-esque vibe to it. They show a lot of images of like the different things that people would do to Barney dolls, and then like the very grotesque Barney artwork that was being drawn in the mid to late 90s. I think they do touch on the David Joyner tantric stuff very early on to get you, I guess, sort of familiar with who he is before they actually start talking about him. And then of course the Patrick Leach situation, the shooting, is also brought up. I want to say this because I was listening to a podcast where, you know, the director, Tommy Avalone, was talking about why he wanted to make this documentary. And he said something along the lines of he saw something about Barney bashing, like a video or an article or something about the Barney bashing in the early 90s. And he thought it would be really interesting to do this documentary about like love and hate, this kind of stuff. And I thought that was a very solid idea to go with for the documentary. The Patrick Leach situation, in a way, almost comes off as though it were the main reason for why this documentary is being made. I don't want to say that it was because, you know, I mean, I'm not the director, right? But the more you get into this first episode, and then especially the second, it almost feels as though the Patrick Leach situation was a vehicle to drive in this strong intrigue into a shooting, but by covering it with a blanket that was marketed with Barney on it, and then you take the blanket off and then it's there. That's what it feels like a lot throughout the documentary. And again, I don't want to say that was the main thing, but they do touch on it a lot. And it's almost like they're setting up that they're going to talk about it a lot in the first episode. Also in a podcast, I heard, the director had an interview, like a really lengthy interview with Sheryl Leach, like a 3 or 4 hour interview, and they were talking about Barney and their lives and stuff like that. And Sheryl ultimately decided that she did not want to be part of the documentary, or she didn't want to be interviewed for the documentary. And they say that in the second part of this doc. They put on the screen that Sheryl did not want to be interviewed for the doc. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. And I remember the director saying that he assumed that that was because Sheryl didn't really want to associate with the negative backlash of Barney and everything that went on, because it was a lot, right? It was a lot for her, being the creator of the character and the brand and everything. And someone else also brings that up in the documentary. I think it was Wendt, who was a babysitter for the Leach family. She also brings up that, Sheryl would talk to you all day about Barney, and but she wouldn't want to be part of any discussion of like the bad aspects of Barney. And I understood that. If she was interviewed for this documentary and then watched it, she would hate it. I think she would. I think she would be very upset. And I started thinking about that more and more because of the different things that they talk about in I Love You, You Hate Me. I legitimately feel as though if she were interviewed and was part of it and watched it, she would hate it. That's not to say the doc is bad. Again, like I said, the documentary is fine. It's okay. It's good. It's a good documentary. What I'm saying is there's things that are talked about that I feel could have been carried a bit better. But before that, I do want to talk about a lot of the things that I like. First of all, in the beginning, they try to get the crew, like the production crew, and even the former cast members of the show, they try to get them to sing I Love You. And there's somebody, I forget who it was exactly. It was somebody from the Jerry Springer show. They're like, hey, can we get you to sit down and sing I Love You? He's like, no. And he just keeps walking. I thought that was really funny. Of course, the original kids that were on the show do sing a little bit of it. They're not like getting into it, but like they do sing a little bit of I Love You. David Joyner sings it. Who else does? It was someone else from the crew. Bob Singleton sings a little bit of it. I think that's a very wholesome part of this documentary. Just them like getting them ready to talk about like this big thing that was a part of their lives. And I think that was very wholesome. Like I said earlier, we see a lot of the big main players that were part of the Barney production crew back in the early 90s. A lot of them. Bob West, David Joyner, of course, we knew they were going to be part of it, right? David Voss. We see Leah Gloria, who played Lucy. We see Pia Manilow or Hamilton. I'm sorry, it's one of those. I apologize. She played Min on Barney. We see Hope Cervantes, who was Tasha. We see Ricky Carter, who was Derek. We see Dean Wendt and Carey Stinson. Please stay tuned when I talk about them because it's very funny to me. We see Sloane Coleman, Bob Singleton. Larry Rifkin is in it as well. And then, and Stephen White, of course. Stephen White is there too. And just a bunch of people from the original production crew of Barney. But then we also see people not a part of Barney that are also big names. Like Steve Burns, bless his heart. Steve Burns is amazing in this documentary. I'm going to talk more about him later too. But Steve Burns is absolutely amazing. He played Steve in Blue's Clues. Just absolutely wonderful. I loved him in it. I loved him. Al Roker's here, Bill Nye the Science Guy. They don't really have too much of like screen time, but they are in it. They got like a lot of people that, again, like aren't part of Barney, but have a play in the narrative that they're trying to tell. Like they have a bunch of they have some anti-hate activists that are part of the documentary. They have a guy that led a really big hate group for Barney and led like the Barney bashing scene in 1993. He comes on, he gives his piece and stuff like that. It's really cool the different amount of people that they got for this documentary. It's really nice, and I like the way that they did it. I'm going off my notes right now. Backyard gang footage. So when we first heard about the documentary, a lot of us thought that it was going to be about the production of the show. It's not really. It goes into a lot of that, but that's not what it's about at all. At the same time, there is a lot of never before seen footage and photos from Barney and the Backyard Gang, including those first 3 tapes and that original costume. And it is crisp, it is beautiful, and I love that we get to see stuff like that. What was it? There was a clip that they showed, and it was behind the scenes of the Backyard show. They were doing, if you're happy, stamp your feet. And Barney was there hiding behind the cardboard boxes, and it's footage of him there, and it pulls out, and you see the set. And when I saw that, my jaw dropped. I was like, I didn't think that they were going to show Backyard Gang footage this early. 1988, and it looks so good. It looks so good. They show photos of the behind the scenes making of 3 Wishes, like them on that huge blue screen. They show, they show them making the cover art for like A Day at the Beach. It's like, there's so much of it, and it's so cool. David Voss, again, as I said earlier, was there, and he put on mime makeup, and he showed that he used to be a mime. And that was really cool. They introduced him as the original body actor of Barney, and he talks about that, which is, again, it's cool because it doesn't feel as though he talks about it all that much. He was with Barney for a long time at different events and appearances and shows and stuff, but he never talks about the fact that he was the original body actor for Barney, or at least not to what I've seen. So seeing him candidly talk about that was very wholesome. David Joyner. Now, this is something that I did not like originally. I had to sort of let it sit for a little bit. And it's definitely got a lot better in the second episode. But the way they introduced him made sense and was also not the best handled, I feel. They introduced David Joyner, and someone, I think it's the director, it's somebody, the person says something along the lines of, people are nervous whenever we talk about you and Barney, and this kind of thing. And David Joyner says something very specific that I wrote down. He says, a lot of people are nervous now about me and Barney. And he talks about like the article that came out about him being a tantric massage therapist. That I didn't really have a problem with, right? Because of course, that's how a lot of people saw David Joyner after that article came out. And that's how a lot of people see him now, unfortunately, because a lot of people have this initial idea about what he does and that being all that it is. And so when that article came out, that very much changed the perception of what he is to a lot of people. So I didn't have any problems with them introducing him that way, right? I mean, he was Barney for a long time, during Barney's peak especially. So I didn't have a problem with them introducing him that way. What bothered me a little bit was they filmed him doing his meditation, where he's like hands to the sky, he's like trembling and shaking and making noises and stuff like that. Interspliced with that was clips of the cast and crew of like the original Barney productions and stuff like that, saying things like, I don't know what it's about. Like that's not for me. Like I don't know. I don't get it. Like whatever. Maybe we're not all meant to be understood like that, right? I don't know. I thought it was strange. And then they kept playing the same meditation clip over and over and over again, interspliced with the people saying things like that. And like, it's very strange because the way that it carries itself is not, I just wasn't really fond with how that scene carried itself. It made it come off as though everyone was looking at him strange and saying, he's different. I mean, whatever. And then just keep playing the same clip. I get it, but like you do understand how that's going to come off with you placing everything like this in the context that it leaves. Especially when they said things like, it's about this, not about that. Especially when I'm around kids, like this, and that. And they really like talk about it. They really like get in his face and ask him questions and all that kind of stuff. And he's explaining himself. But again, the way the scene carries itself with the context that it holds, it paints a weird perspective that I wasn't really all that into. And I was honestly just waiting for it to be over, just because I know what he was saying. But again, the way that the clips were placed I understand what people's perspective will be after this documentary, and I hope it's not like it was. I hope he's carried with a lot more respect. I hope he's given a lot more credit for what he did with Barney and the community. And again, like I said earlier, it gets a lot better in the second episode. It's just the first episode where he's introduced, I wasn't really the fondest of his initial bringing into the documentary. But as I said again and again, it gets better in the second part. So that's it. Whatever. Another thing that I thought was nice was that they talk about like the edginess in the 90s. You know, how the relation between people hating on Barney and like why they're hating on Barney. You know, in the 90s, people are a lot more edgy. In the 90s was the introduction of a lot of kids shows that were very violence oriented. You know, Power Rangers, they like Transformers, all that kind of stuff. You know, there was this huge emphasis on being quote unquote bad, being strong, being macho, all this kind of stuff. And in the 90s is when being gay was seen as an outwardly horrible thing, especially then in the 90s, right? And the thought of Barney being this being that is supposedly male, but also loving of everyone, and being the bright, like purple color that he is, was seen as a target, a way of a vessel for people to hate through. And that being a lot of what played a hand in fueling that hatred and the Barney bashing that went on. I don't remember, I think Steve Burns actually said, you know, how there was something broken about Grover and Sesame Street. There was something broken about Big Bird. There was something broken about all your favorite children's characters, but there was nothing broken about Barney. And I like the way that he touched on that, because that's a very specific thing that he pointed out, and it made a lot of sense. If you loved Barney, then you became a target, almost, especially if you were an adult, mainly if you were an adult. They also touch on how, you know, as an adult, you know, with Sesame Street, there's a lot of things for both the kids and the adults to love, you know, but with Barney, it was mainly aimed at like a preschool mindset. So with adults, it's more of, well, there's nothing for me to love here, so I hate this thing now. Why can't I enjoy it, you know? And a lot of that confusion stemmed from, and a lot of that confusion played the biggest hand rather, in the Barney bashing. And I really like how they got a bunch of, you know, like the anti-hate activists together to talk about and sort of figure out why people were acting the way that they did in the 90s. That was a very nice that was a very nice section that I enjoyed a lot. That was pretty much it for episode 1 that I wanted to talk about. That's all of my notes and everything that I had. Maybe if I remember something else later on, I'll bring it up, but like for episode 1, that was pretty much it. I thought it was fine. I thought the episode was fine as it was. Again, there were a lot of things that I was very iffy about, but I thought episode 1 was fine enough. They ended by talking about Patrick Leach, and as I was saying earlier, the Patrick Leach situation to me very much felt like a vehicle, because throughout, of course, you know, Patrick Leach was the son, or is the son of Sheryl Leach, and you know, they were saying how growing up with your mom being the creator of Barney could leave a toll on you. And it's like, yeah, I can see that. At the same time, it didn't seem as though Patrick was really connected with the Barney brand at all. He wasn't like featured in anything, and he wasn't like a role in the franchise. He was the reason that Sheryl created Barney, but he wasn't hands-on with Barney like Sheryl was, and then her husband and all that. But they continuously bring up how, you know, Patrick, he was the son of the creator of Barney, so he must have been going through a lot, and I'm sure he was. I'm sure he was. And they just keep bringing up here and there how Patrick may have developed some aversion to Barney, this strange, or rather just growing up as like an angsty teen. But they never really specifically link that to Barney. It's never like brought up with any evidence of any traces of Barney. It's just talking about how he grew up as an angsty teen, which a lot of us have, you know? And it just felt kind of strange whenever they would bring it up. And they end episode 1 by talking about that, and then leading into the next one with Lori Wendt talking about how she babysit Patrick. And they end it specifically by having her say, I don't know how Patrick could have ended up the way that he did. And then putting a little title card, this is 2 months later. And then her coming back and saying, you know, I have more that I want to say. And that's how we lead into the second episode. The second episode has her talking about how she felt she was a little bit dishonest and that she has a little bit more to say about Patrick, but that she didn't want to say it earlier because she felt as though it would be things that could possibly upset Sheryl Leach, which is a very interesting thing that I thought about, because as I said before, Sheryl declined to be interviewed for the documentary, and she is it seemed as though she's sensitive to a lot of these different things, but they go heavily into it. So I hope that she is okay. The second episode, I think, I was about to say I think it was better than the first. I actually think the first is better than the second, but that's because of what they talk about in the... Anyways, let me just talk about the second episode. One thing I thought was very funny, they got Bob West to read the booklet that was made as like the Destroy Barney, like anti-Barney booklet that was made as like a role-playing game. They got him to read it, and he was like laughing at like the really grotesque Barney artwork. I thought that was really nice. I had a feeling they were going to do something like that. They do get the guy that created that role-playing game, or rather was intrigued by the role-playing game and became a vital member in it. And that he talks about, you know, how he was attracted to this role-playing game because of what it was, and how he hated Barney as well. A lot of people in the documentary talk about how they grew up with Big Bird, and they grew up with Sesame Street. They grew up with a lot of these different characters, and then Barney came in and then just took everything over. And that's a lot of why people aren't really fond of Barney, or weren't in the 90s. What I thought was hilarious, I said I was going to talk about, you know, Dean Wendt and Carey Stinson. What I thought was hilarious was that they talk about the hit entertainment years. First, they get to the end of the 90s, you know, Sheryl Leach leaving the program. She wants to spend time with her son, and they talk about lines selling, or lines and lyric, whatever, selling the Barney brand to hit entertainment in the 2000s. And Andrew says, you know, we've already lost 2 vital cast members of the show. You know, the new company recast the voice of Barney. Dean Wendt sits down. They recast the body of Barney. Carey Stinson sits down, doesn't open his mouth. You don't hear a word from Carey Stinson in this interview. And I know that there had to have been a lot of stuff left on the cutting room floor that just wasn't used. I'm sure they interviewed him a lot for this documentary, and then maybe like time constraints, they weren't able to keep all of it in. Dean Wendt isn't much. Dean Wendt isn't there much at all either. He's there more than Carey, but like Dean Wendt has like a few. I'd say he has at least a minute of screen time. Maybe not even that, but he does speak in the documentary. Carey is not there at all. You see him once. You see one shot of him for like 3 seconds, and it says like, you know, body actor Barney 2001 to 2010, and then that's it. He's not, and he doesn't say anything. And I thought that was, I don't know. It was kind of funny because, not because of that, but because of the way that they describe the hit entertainment years of Barney is very much, it's almost like what the community thinks of the hit entertainment years, because they talk about it very quickly and then it's done. Like they don't really go into it at all. I think even Andrew says, you know, the Barney that I grew up with, that I knew, was gone. And then Sloane Coleman also goes on to say it's like the creative was gone because Sheryl Leach was gone, you know, and then that the company only wanted money. And I remember hearing them saying, you know, like they recast the voice, and you know they wanted to introduce more conflicts. And then immediately after, in 2010, Barney and Friends was canceled, and I said, like they did not, they didn't go, they barely even used footage of those years in the documentary at all. It was mainly on the classic years and what happened with the backlash of that. Like that was it. Like they didn't even really. I just thought that was funny. They also go into the original kid cast of the show, you know, like seasons 1 through 3. They went back to school after leaving Barney, and you know they were bullied. You know they were taunted. They were called names. They were seen as these goody two shoes, and how they eventually went into bad habits because of that. They didn't want to be labeled as the Barney kid. They wanted to be just a normal kid and to do bad things, and that's very understandable. And it's nice hearing them talk about it because it feels as though they never really got to talk about it. One thing that really hit my heart was that Ricky Carter, who played Derek on Barney and Friends, I never knew that he was shot and paralyzed in 2004. I never knew that. Out of everything that I read about the cast, I never knew that that happened to him. And it makes you really realize that when they left the show, you know, a lot of stuff happened. Like, they had to face the real world. And again, like, that's something that really hit me, because it's like, you would have never known. After this, they really get back into the Patrick Leach situation. They talk about how Sheryl and her husband divorced, and how Sheryl and Patrick went to live off in some other area. I don't know where it was, but they went to live somewhere, and Patrick had an argument with one of his neighbors, and then he shot him 5 times. They bring in a criminal defense attorney and like I think a prosecutor. I could be wrong about that, but they bring in like a legal team that was part of that situation, and it goes on for a while. Like, I feel like there's a good like 10 minutes where they're talking about how the situation unfolded. None of it traces back to Barney. It all just seems like an argument with his neighbor, and you know, they're saying, oh well, he thought he was paranoid, or sorry, they felt as though Patrick was paranoid about what this neighbor could do to their family. You know, he was worried about he felt threatened and all that, but it never really traces back to Barney itself. I wish they could have carried this a little bit better, because this ends up becoming the main part of this episode. Like, they talk about a lot of different stuff, but this Patrick Leach shooting is like the biggest core of this episode. It's a lot of the reason that people are drawn to this documentary is because they're going to talk about that. And again, it's a very vital piece of this episode, and I just wish it, not that it wasn't, well, I guess, yeah. I wish the core of this episode was more something bad that happened that was the result of Barney. It didn't feel like this was the result of Barney. It felt like this was, there was maybe a tie here a little bit, but as I said earlier, he didn't really have like a hands-on experience with Barney. Again, with them not wanting to be part of this documentary at all, it just feels strange, I think, to see all this play out in the doc, knowing that they didn't want any part of it. I mean, Patrick shot and wounded somebody 5 times. Like, I don't really care about it. But like Sheryl, like I don't know, man. I don't know. That, I mean, I've said there were things that I didn't really like about this documentary. That, and you know, David Joyner, the way that they introduced him, and maybe something else that I said were like the main reasons that, or the main things that I didn't really enjoy too much about the doc. Everything else was fine. I was talking about Steve Burns, and Steve Burns, again, absolutely wonderful, because at the end he's talking about how, well, first off, David Joyner talks about how Barney did so much for him and his growth as a person and just everything, and he shows like photographs and he's really touched by it. Bob West talks about how Barney seems to be like a mirror for who we are inside. It shows you yourself and the things that you truly hate and things like that, and if it's really worth it. Some of the people that were part of the anti-Barney associations and societies don't go back and say, I love Barney now. They don't, you know, they're not going to do that. They just say, like, you know, Barney did a lot for me, and I don't really hate him. I don't really hate him, but I was attracted to this society of people that were doing this, and that. There was somebody that was part of Barney bashing that said that Barney, you know, the things that he hated included both Barney and then like his alcoholism and stuff like that. So the same way he was hating Barney, he was putting that same hate towards like fueling his alcoholism and this and that. And he was saying that Barney did a lot for me and healing that. And I thought that was really nice. It was, again, like, it's really nice to see people talking about their own experiences and what helped them and what healed them and what played a vital role in their life, even when it was something entirely different before. I thought that was very nice, and it was very well thought out, and I loved that these people got to speak their truth. Steve Burns says something at the very end where he's talking about how Barney was a brilliant show and it showed you how to love, but it also showed a lot of people that there wasn't really a true reason to hate, and how, you know, people grew up with their own characters. And then he turns to the camera and he looks in the lens and he's asking us, he's like, who is your Barney growing up? And you know, it cuts to a lot of the different crew members and everyone saying, you know, it was Big Bird, you know, it was my teddy bear, it was this, it was that. My Barney was I don't know, Elmo, whatever. And it cuts back to Steve Burns, and he says, now imagine going into a room and seeing 100 people hating on that character. That would hurt. And that, I was like, oh, he almost made me cry. He when I say Steve Burns was the best part of this documentary, I mean that, because being from the Blue's Clues background and him having he talked about earlier how, you know, people would go online spreading rumors about him. People would say, you know, like, he's dead, and he'd have to go on his show and be like, I'm not, I'm alive, and how that over and over and over again will take a toll on you. So when he was saying, you know, who was your Barney growing up? Now think about, you know, how everyone hates that character. How would that make you feel? Like, that was very strong. Like, that really struck a chord with me, because it's true. It's very true. And actually, the last note that I have here on my my note docket just says Steve Burns in all caps, because he really was a lovely soul in this documentary. I don't really have too much else to say about I Love You, You Hate Me. As I said in the very beginning, it's a fine documentary. It's absolutely fine. It's not overly offensive. It's fine. I enjoyed a lot of it. I'd say at least 86% of it. I loved it, right? It was well edited. It was well researched. It had a lot of great people in it. A lot of people that were able to tell their truth. A lot of people that were able to tell their stories. Cast members of the show: David Joyner, Bob West, David Voss, Stephen White, Sloane Coleman, like everyone. I loved seeing the actress that played Min. I loved seeing the actress that played Lucy, Derek. Like, they were all wonderful. What's her name? Michaela. She played Riff. She's also in the documentary. Like, it, just a lot of wonderful people that were here. Dean Wendt, Carey Stinson. It was very well researched, very well put together, and for the most part, I liked a lot of it. And I hope that people go to check it out, just because it talks about a lot of things that were very stereotypical, very just thrown around about Barney for a long time. And I hope that if people watch this, that they have a newer perspective on what it was on that show and how it affected everyone, because it did. It affected everyone, both on the show and out. Like, a lot of people had a lot happen to them that changed their life, for good or bad. And, you know, Barney was a big hand in that. And he taught us all to love. And there is a fruit fly flying around my microphone. If you get the chance, you know, go into it with an open mind. If you're not into it, that's fine. You don't have to watch it, right? They did put a lot of work into it. So hopefully this review from a long-time Barney enthusiast and sway your opinion either way. And again, I want to thank my friends that were part of the documentary. You know, Andrew, Kaylin, Jackson, Emilia, and of course the director, Tommy. Like, you all did a phenomenal job for what you did. I'm very proud of what you all put together. I have been Hedge. Thank you for boarding my rainbow line. I'll see you at the next stop. See you. Gwen, Jackson, Emilia, Velveteen, Alicia, Cameron, Caroline, Ian, Junior the Hedgehog, Common J, Mango, Megley, Nerdy Disney, Sawyer.